I do want to talk about the threat that the age of computer has given us, which are the cyber threats. And they're cyber threats both at home and abroad, the enemy within and the enemy without. And I learned that early on, growing up, about what it means to fight the enemy within and the enemy without. Because when other children had their mothers take them to the playground to swing on the swings and play in the sandbox, my mother took me to the Senate Racket Committee hearings. That's because my father, Robert Kennedy, was investigating the mob. And I think at the age of 4, I was there listening to the mob, not answering my father's questions, and instead saying, which I think were my first full sentence, "I refuse to answer that question on the grounds that it may tend to incriminate me." And they did not like what my father was doing. And in fact, when I was in 3rd grade at Our Lady of Victory, a parochial school, 45 kids in one class with a nun, the mob threatened to throw acid in my eyes and in the eyes of my brothers, Bobby and Joe. And so we, for 4 months, couldn't leave the school and we couldn't leave our house because the mob was out there trying to threaten us and trying to intimidate my father. But my father was not going to be intimidated, and he still went after the mob. So we learned early on that if you were going to try to do something good and attack evil, there were going to be repercussions, but you had to continue to fight. And I learned that about the enemy within. But we were also threatened without. And as some of you may know from studying history, the Soviet Union put nuclear missiles, into Cuba, the Cuban Missile Crisis, in which a lot of Americans, including my uncle and my father, were very worried about what those missiles were going to do and whether they were going to be shot into the United States. And most of that time, my father was in the White House trying to negotiate and figure out what to do. And at one point, he came home, and in our family, we used to say nightly prayers and then the rosary around the bed. And he came into the room after we had said the rosary and said to each of us individually, "The Soviets may bomb Washington, D.C., and we may all be obliterated here. So would any of you want to get out of D.C.?" And he asked us, each of us, and all of us said, "No, we're going to stay here with you, Daddy. We trust you will get us peace." And as you know, he did. And my parents always wanted us to be able to be strong, know our history, know current events, and be physically fit. So every night at dinner, sitting around the dinner table, we were quizzed on current events. And my parents thought that was such a good idea, they also quizzed the carpool. And you can see, whenever my mother was running the carpool, they'd say, "Oh no, Mrs. Kennedy is driving. What happened today?" And we were also supposed to know what was going on in history. And my father would quiz us. On what hill was the Battle of Bunker Hill fought? Breed's Hill, for those who didn't know. And we were also supposed to be physically fit. And we also played touch football, you may have heard. And here I am saying to my father, 10 steps and go to the right. And I believed that it's important to pass on those values to my children and to my grandchildren. So every Tuesday night, I call it Taco Tuesday, I make tacos for my grandchildren. And I tried to pass on those same values to them. The other night, my grandchild, Gabriella, came home with a chart saying social media or social crisis. And you can see she showed all the ways that media hit the brain. And probably you recognize these icons. There's Facebook and all those other ways. And what she really wanted to get across to me is that girls now go into the hospital at twice the time as much as they used to for self-harm, because they feel so badly about themselves. And she described how the number of suicides have gone up, depression has gone up, the amount of eating disorder has gone up with this amount of social media. And you can see in the picture a little girl that she drew. Half of the face is looking at social media and is smiling, and the other half is not on social media and is sad. And my granddaughter drew what she thought, ideas of what she should get off of social media, go outside, play, do other activities. That's what we need. And you can see from the chart, she's right. And all of you know this. But what's interesting is I actually knew this before she was born, because I had read a book, a research book by Professor Sherry Turkle at MIT more than 12 years ago. And she had predicted this was going to happen. She had said that the social media companies were addicting our children, just as the tobacco companies had addicted our children. They were going to make us sick. They were going to hurt our mental health and our physical health. And when I read that review, I called up a friend of mine who had sued the tobacco companies. And I said, you should sue the social media companies. And he laughed at me. And he said, Kathleen, I'm finished with suing. And he was saying, I'm not going to sue. And I realized now, you can only really sue and pass a law if lots of people see the problem. And 12 years ago, lots of people didn't see the problem with social media. But now, Jonathan Haidt has written a bestseller list and has pointed out what is going on. And he's come up with some solutions about the age at which somebody can get a social media and watch it. And some people object to that. How could we do such a thing? But we have age restrictions for drink, age restrictions for tobacco, age restrictions for driving, all those age restrictions to protect our children, and I think we should do the same thing for social media. Thank you. Now, I'm not going to end there, because the computer age has also brought in other kinds of attacks. And those attacks you're all familiar with. The personal attacks on your identity, your credit cards, how you do phishing. You're all familiar with that. But there is something far worse that is going on. And they are attacking much larger objects. And they're doing it because it's easier, because there are large conglomerates of criminal activity, and there are large state actors that are attacking institutions and our military, and we have got to do something about that, which is what I'm going to talk about now. You may not have heard about this, and I'd be curious if you had. $20 trillion is stolen everywhere through cyber attacks. 20 trillion. And if you compare that to China's GDP, China's GDP is $18 trillion. So we lose $20 trillion of money every year, and China's GDP is 18 trillion. And each business that has a cyber attack loses about $5 million. Let's move on. Now, what does this mean for the United States? 2 years ago, 9 telecommunications companies in the United States were under a cyber attack. For 4 months, nobody even knew they were under attack. That's how scary it is. And they got what every person who was wiretapped in the United States, and they also realized who wasn't wiretapped, therefore. Most of our diplomats were attacked and found out their telephone numbers, their internet addresses. Diplomats and our government officials, they got the telephone numbers of Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, and Kamala Harris. That's how clever and smart they are. And for 4 months, nobody even knew that was going on. And if you talk to people in the government, they still don't know if the bugs are in these telecommunication systems. One example, they got into our Navy systems in the South China Sea, and so we could not communicate with our allies when we were doing naval work in the South China Sea. And 91% of our hospitals have been attacked. A friend of mine described how her mother had been on an operation table in the hospital. She got off. The hospital was shut down, and they didn't know what medicine to give her. So, and nobody tells you, because no hospital wants to tell you that they've been attacked, or no company, none of those telecommunications companies wants to tell you they've been attacked. Now, you can read about it if you really want to dive into it, but most of the time, none of you know this is going on, because it's not in their interest to tell you, and therefore you cannot create a public outcry. We need to change our laws, we need to change what's going on, because you don't know about it. But let me tell you, we have in our history ways that we can change things. Let's look at something that used to be different. That's our family car. Does anybody see anything wrong with that car? Probably did not have a baby sitting in the front seat with that kind of car seat now, right? And to tell you the truth, you used to have 4 kids sitting in the front seat. As I pointed out, we were not always really good in our family, and we had many fights in the front seat of that car. So cars were changed from that picture on. And who changed it? Ralph Nader. And when Ralph Nader went forward and said, unsafe at any speed, he changed the whole culture. He said, it's not the driver's fault, it's the manufacturer's fault. And when he did that, GM went after him. They sent women to tempt him. They've sent money, drugs. They checked his bank accounts, if they could, I'm telling you. And why weren't they successful? Because basically, Ralph Nader was a monk. And so Ralph Nader, and most people knew somebody who had died in a car accident, and they wanted the cars to change, and the cars did change. The cars got a lot safer. And we started not blaming the driver for everything, but understanding that the system had to change. Cars changed, highways changed, and over the next 2 decades, there was a 20% decrease in the number of people who died on highways. So if you stop blaming the individual, it's my fault, and start blaming the system, you can change things and you can make things safer. And that's what we need to do. So in Europe last year, they did pass a law on making something called secure at the start. The first time you buy a software, it's supposed to be safe at the start. And it's supposed to be safe for the next 5 years. Remember, we used to have consumer protection on cars and on everything else we buy. We don't have that same mindset for software, but we should. You can say that's right too. It's 5 years, and where we get our software, we should have secure supply chains. We should report breaches so we know, oh, you say it's safe? Well, why did it break down? Why was 2 days after I bought it, I got attacked again? So in other words, we have to shift our mindset from it's my fault to it's their responsibility. And in order for that to happen, we're going to have to, I believe, not only change laws, I think what we should do is appoint a cyber czar. Now, you could call it a cabinet member, you could create a new cabinet, you could create a part of the FBI, you could create, each state could do something. I'm not saying this is the exact answer, but we could all have discussions about what we should do to get the best scientists and technology to say, we've got to create safer items, safer products. We've got to share that information. We have to, when we pass laws, we have to have a way to implement those laws. We have to get people who care about privacy to work with people who care about protection. All of this has to work together. And part of it has to do with us, because we all like beautiful things. Big surprise. So we like houses that are look like this, very beautiful, just like our products are very beautiful, just like we like to be very beautiful. But there are a lot of holes in this house, just like there are a lot of holes in the products we buy. That means that we get into those holes, and so do everybody else. Young hackers, young as 12, 13, really bad actors, and really our enemies abroad. So I'm telling you, there are a lot of people out there that want to use our beautiful, open, lovely computers, iPhones, and everything else to get into those hospital systems, to get into our Navy systems, to get into our telecommunication systems, and destroy us and hurt us. I could go on and tell you many worse stories, but happily I'm not. But I will end with a story. When my Uncle Jack died, and I was 12 years old, my father wrote me this letter. Dear Kathleen, you seem to understand that Jack died and was buried today. As the oldest of the Kennedy grandchildren, you have a particular responsibility, a special responsibility to Jack and to Joe, who was my uncle who died in World War II. Be kind, work for your country, love, Daddy. Now you think about what would happen if that happened today. The reaction today is revenge, anger, get back at somebody. But he said, family, country, and love. And I think of this group who wants to help one another and wants to work together and understands that we need to love each other and our country in order to protect ourselves, not just me, but each of us, against the threats we face. Good luck.